Welcome to the B2B Content Show, a podcast about the how, what, and why of B2B content marketing. I'm Jeremy Sheeran. My guest is Katia Carpio, Marketing Director at Visionary Eye Doctors. Katia, it's so nice to have you on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor.
Great. So tell us about a memorable marketing moment from your career.
I think that the biggest one for me was when I was learning. I was still in the process of learning a lot of the digital marketing concepts and learning about how the reporting went. And I would ask a lot of questions. I was like that little kid that was like, why this? Why that?
Mhm.
And I could tell that the people that were answering my questions were obviously getting really annoyed, but I mean I wanted to know, I wanted to learn. And then I started figuring out that things weren't really the way they were supposed to be. The more I was learning, the more I researched. And so I approached my boss. I was like, "Hey, I don't think this is looking too good. I think that we need to make some changes." And she was like, "Are you sure? We've been with them for a long time." And then I kept insisting. I kept pushing and pushing and pushing. And it turned out that I was right. And I was, a little doubtful because I was still in the process of learning. But my boss gave me a chance to explain and talk about it, and we discussed it over. And so that really gave me a big boost of confidence because I was like, okay, maybe I am learning, but I'm getting this. And it's a process always because you're always learning and there's always all these new methods. But it was something that really marked my career with just like a huge stepping stone in my learning.
Oh, wow. So what was it that you noticed that was like, wait a minute, this doesn't seem right? What was that thing?
So we had really plateaued in our, uh, I guess our growth in digital marketing with our SEO and our pay per click and our Google ads.
Hmm.
So I had noticed I was like, wait a minute, we're pumping all this money in, but we're not really getting those results. And there were some things that just weren't adding up because we were starting these new campaigns, but we weren't being advised that other things were running in the background that were gonna not work for our campaigns. So me asking these questions kind of brought these things to light, and we were able to make those changes that were necessary for us, and we were able to switch to something that a service that was more focused to our industry because it
Hmm.
is so specific, and it's been great so far.
Wow, that's kind of awesome. You know, that so in other words, you were using an agency and you were like, well, how, what about this? And they're like, oh, don't worry about that. That's
Yeah.
how it's supposed to be, one, et cetera. But you weren't satisfied. You were like, I don't know. That doesn't make sense. And you kept pushing and asking. I mean, that's really awesome. Like it would be so easy to just be like, well, they're the experts. I guess, what do I know? I'm not
Right.
an
Yeah.
expert. But it's like, no, it almost always pays at least to ask questions, right? If there's like
Yeah.
something nagging at your brain, or you're like, I'm seeing something different, I'm not dumb, like keep pushing, and don't, just because someone tells you like, oh, it's fine, that doesn't always mean it's fine.
Right. Yeah. It was one of those, it was almost like a life lesson too, because
Mm.
you can't just take it that someone's going to give you the answer you want. You got to find the answers you want.
Yeah, and I think especially when it comes to something like marketing, maybe generally, and especially digital marketing, which we're all so into it now, but it's a relatively new thing still in the grand scheme of things, right? And there's a lot we don't know, and there's a lot that we're learning. And so
Right.
anyone who claims to have all the answers, they don't. Or,
Yeah.
they just don't.
Yeah, it was interesting. It was really interesting, especially when I would call things out, they would look at me like, "Wait a minute, how did she figure that one out?"
Mm.
And they would take it was funny because we would be on phone calls and they just would take like this really long pause and then try to give me an answer or figure out something to say. So it was really impactful and moving forward.
Yeah, I'm sure that gave you a ton of confidence to be like, okay, just ask good questions, and that can reveal a lot of good information, or spark new ideas for different ways to do things. I bet a lot of um you know marketing experts, or like SEO experts, and of course I don't have anyone particular in mind, but I think a lot of it is like they work with companies who have no idea how that stuff works, and they're relying like 100% on the agency to just, okay, make it happen, you know? And if you don't know anything about it, it's hard to even know what questions to ask. And so I bet a lot of these agencies get used to just like, well, this is how we do things. They don't know. They don't understand. They don't know. And that, but then the
Yeah.
minute you start asking questions, like you said, they're like, what? Like, maybe no one ever really questioned them on that stuff before.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It exactly that. That's basically what happened. I mean, they were giving us the leads that we wanted,
Mm-hmm.
but the process behind it, I was like, wait a minute, this doesn't really make much sense to me based on what I had already learned. And then
Mm-hmm.
research makes a world of a difference. I'm
Do do your own
reading about it.
research.
Yeah, do your own research, just don't take one answer, ask around, talk to people,
Yeah.
uh, just, Googling it, they would give me, oh, this is average for your industry. I would look it up and it wasn't. One doesn't even
Mm.
close. So it's just, I always recommend anyone who doesn't know, just do the research, look it up. That's what my boss kept telling me to just read about it.
Great advice, right? And so
Yeah.
easy to do. I mean, right, literally just Google it. Just Google it. Start there. See what
Yeah.
you find.
It's so
Okay.
simple, but
Wow.
we always miss it.
Love that. Love that. Okay, thanks for sharing that. So let's get into our main topic today. I mean, that could have been our main topic, but it's actually not. um, so we're going to talk a little bit about podcasting as a marketing tool in the medical realm. And now I know you guys have some experience with this. You guys have started a podcast. So just tell us a little bit about that, what the podcast, what it's called, what it is, sort of, and how you got started with it.
So our podcast is called the EYU Show. We have it available on the Apple Podcast platform, and Spotify. So this idea came from one of our physicians. She's actually has a pretty large following amongst people with dry eyes, which you wouldn't think that it would be that popular, dry eyes, but it's actually really impressive. She has a blog and a lot of people look for her. We have a lot of international patients that fly overseas to have
Hmm.
those treatments because we're one of the only facilities in the country that do just about every type of dry eye treatment. But I'm not gonna bore you with all of the technicalities and the science behind it. But
Sure.
basically, a lot of this stuff is like very new amongst the treatments for dry eyes. So she wanted to provide her patients a way to basically have them listen without having to sit in the waiting room and come in for a visit and learn about these things, and having to sit there for like 30 minutes and listen to her tell them about all these
Yeah.
treatments, which can be very confusing for people, especially if you're just getting all of this information at once. So, we really were using it as a tool more for patient education,
Mm-hmm.
which is very key in our industry because most patients have actually a higher success rate if they feel more confident in their medical decisions and understanding their treatments. So that was really the goal, and a lot of branding as well, because we don't really know a lot of people that do podcasts, well, at least amongst those in eye care. So we really wanted something that was unique, but
Mm-hmm.
that's how it all came together. And I have no experience in podcasting, and neither did she. So we were like, all right, let's ask around, let's get some advice. We bought a mic, we set up a tripod, and we got to recording.
Mm-hmm. Wow, I love that. So you just did it,
Yeah.
without overthinking it or worrying, what if we do it the wrong way? You just got into it and started doing that, which is usually the best way to start most things, right? And then you
Yeah.
learn as you go. So, okay, so you mentioned that the main purpose of the podcast so far has been patient education, right?
Yeah.
So it would seem to me like one of the benefits you get from it is saving time, so that ideally patients can listen to the podcast before they come in and learn, instead of every single time the doctor having to kind of educate every patient one on one, right from scratch about all these things. There's another way that they can learn about it from the doctor in her own voice.
Yeah, and the interesting part of it, well, it's because it's so specific. Dry eyes and just eye care in general is just so specific. Um, when patients would come in, a lot of them had already had like the basic treatments, and they
Mm,
wanted more. They wanted, the meat and the potatoes of what they could get to relieve their discomfort. So a lot of them, have done their research. They didn't want the basic, like, oh, this is your treatment, this is what's going to happen, this is where you're going to be. They wanted the science behind it.
mm.
And that's what she provided within that podcast.
Oh, wow. Interesting. Okay. And it sounds like she did that because patients were asking for it.
Yeah,
Hmm.
patients were asking.
Okay. So, wow, what a concept. Your patients are asking for a thing, and then you provide it for them, and it works. That
Yeah,
sounds
they love
smart.
it. Yeah, we've gotten great feedback from the patients. We have patients that listen to an episode like 4 times and they're like, when's the next
Wow.
episode coming out?
Wow. So, and that's so interesting too, because this is obviously a very niche particular audience, right? So you're
Yeah.
not just trying to reach anyone who stumbles on the podcast. A very concentrated group of people who are interested in this very specific topic. And apparently, I mean, I'm sure if they Googled it, like you said, they are already researching it, right?
Hmm.
So there is information out there about dry eye, right, and treatments
Right.
for it. So why do you think, like, given that there is so much, that there is other information out there, why is it, do you think, that this particular information that's being provided through the podcast, why is that resonating so much with the patients?
I think it's because she likes to address the human aspect of the
Mm,
podcast, of the whole thing, because, we have patients that are to the point where they're suicidal because of their dry eye discomfort.
mm,
So, it gives them a ray of hope, being like, hey, there are treatments that could potentially help you. And then we've slowly been developing the podcast since it was a concept that we just started.
mm-hmm,
So we wanted to expand to other eye care. So we've had guest doctors from our practice because we have 14 doctors that would come and talk about different things like pterygium or myopia. But really it came down to her saying like, hey, there's hope. You're going to make it through this, and we're going to use the tools we have, because a lot of these patients feel like they're hopeless. So it was it
mm,
was a very positive outlook on these treatments, giving them all the information they want to know, and then in the end still leaving them with, hey, it's we're going to figure it out. We're still
mm-hmm,
working on these cures. We're going to figure it out, and it's going to be it's just giving them that hope, really. That's really
mm-hmm,
what patients really resonate with it, because they feel like there's no answers, because there really is no answer at this point with dry eyes. So
mm.
it's giving them the information that they want for what's out there now, but then also saying like, hey, there's potentially more that could be coming.
Wow. So it sounds like the reason the podcast has been as successful as it has been is because it's not just providing information, like here are facts about dry, but there's like a strong emotional human component to it. As you just said, people are tuning in not just to learn more about dry eye and the treatments, but also to feel like I'm not alone in this.
Yeah. Yeah, it's there's even like Facebook groups. Like there it's
Mm,
not a few people, it's a lot of people that have this problem. And
mm-hmm,
I mean, like I said, we have people that come from all over the world to get these treatments. So it's nice because it's almost like it gives a community feel to it.
mm-hmm. Wow, interesting. So, by the way, what is the doctor's name?
Her name is Dr. Sandra Laura Kramers.
Okay. And how would you describe, I assume she's the host of the podcast, right? She's the
Yeah.
main voice?
Yeah,
Okay.
she's the main voice.
Okay. And it sounds like it's sometimes maybe she's having a conversation with another doctor. Maybe
Yeah.
sometimes it's just her talking about issues. And how would you describe her style as a host? It sounds to me like she's very good at doing this in a way that connects in a human way with the listeners. Like
Hmm.
this is a topic that could be, pardon my pun, but it could be very dry. um, I'm not belittling the dry eye, but you know what I mean. Um, like it's a technical thing, right? You could do this in a way that's like very technical and dry, but it sounds like that's not how it is, and that she's really good at connecting with people on an emotional level. How does she do that? Do you think?
I think it's the whole seeing it in person because the patients that she interacts with, so she knows
Mm,
what the patients want. She knows what the patients like, uh, what what they're looking for. So when with all that human interaction, she likes to conduct it almost like she's having a conversation with the patient, and getting really technical with the terms, which can be challenging, but at the same time, it's really interesting how when she conducts the conversation, even when it's just by herself, she's answering the questions that most patients ask when they come in to see her. So I think that's what's really made it different, is that's almost like she's having a conversation with you and you're the one in the examination chair,
hmm
and she's just explaining it and going through the steps, going through the risks and the benefits, which is what patients want to know.
okay. So it sounds like she's doing the really sort of crucial and totally common sense thing of she knows her audience
Yeah,
and knows how to
definitely.
talk to them because she talks to them every day in person.
Yeah.
And it's just it's as like you said, it's as though she's talking directly to them in person. And of course that's going to resonate, right?
Yeah,
Using
definitely.
coming from a doctor that they trust and that they respect and look to for help. Wow. So now how do you guys promote the podcast?
So we have it on our website, and then we tell patients about it that are, in the office. When patients want to learn more, they're like, "Oh, where can I learn more about these things?" Well, we direct them to the podcast. Since it's still pretty new, I mean, we haven't really pushed much on it because we're still developing the concepts, developing the topics, but overall, they people mainly find it through our website.
Okay. And so it sounds a lot of it is literally word of mouth. You're literally
Yeah.
telling people like, "Hey, one by one, we have this podcast. You should check it out." And then word tends to spread that way, which is great because there's good data that a lot that's how people discover podcasts generally a lot of the time. It's word of mouth. A
Yeah.
friend will tell you like, "Oh, I've been listening to this podcast. You should check it out. I think you'd like it."
Yeah, definitely. That's how me and my sister share podcasts. She'll tell me, "Hey, have you heard this episode?" I'm like, "No, I've never even heard of that show."
Right. And that's really the best kind of marketing,
Yeah,
right? When like a friend, someone that you trust and like know and like just mentions it and you're like, "Oh, well, if they like it, it's at least worth checking out." you
right.
know
Definitely.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And now with podcasting, right, you can get pretty good data from audio hosting platforms and stuff. So how do you guys how much attention do you pay to that stuff? And so far, I mean, I know you've mentioned that the podcast is relatively new and it can take time to get enough data to really make use of it, but have you been looking at that data consistently, and if so, like, what do you do with it?
So yeah, we've been checking it as about once a month to compare how we did the month prior towards
Hmm.
the following month. So we'll look at just really how many listeners, how many people have liked it, the reviews, if there's comments or people have requested certain topics, and we'll just push that into the following weeks if we can. So we really just push to see if we have more listeners because it is a tight knit group. So,
Yeah.
we want to push it more for branding. So we've been pushing more general topics like just general eye care, things just to prevent dry eyes, not when you already have them, or amongst kids and doctors who have very have specialties like the founder of the company, Dr. Martinez. He does
Hmm.
pterygium surgery, and that's not very common in our area. So we want to we push it so that it's more for a general audience now,
Mm.
but we've always tried to follow and just increase the listener base in whatever way we can.
Okay. Right. And, for podcast statistics are in some ways a little bit limited, right? Like
Yeah.
you can get a general sense of how many people are listening to both a given episode and the whole thing, to episodes overall and so on. But you really don't know exactly who those people are. But definitely it sounds like it's still useful for you guys just to know like, okay, are we getting more listeners, fewer listeners, which topics are, really pop and stuff like that.
Right. Yeah.
Hmm. And you mentioned that there are groups like I'm not sure if you said Facebook specifically, but like online groups about dry eye, like people that have this condition. Have you used those groups at all to help get out word about the podcast, or is that something you're thinking about doing?
So, yeah, we've joined a few different groups of amongst the different conditions that we treat in the office. And then we'll put out information. And then if people have questions, they're like, hey, do you guys know anyone local? And then we'll put out our information, be like, hey, you can visit us. We offer these services, type of thing. And then for the podcast itself, in those dry eye groups, sometimes you don't even have to. A lot of our patients just say, like, hey, you guys should listen to this podcast. And
Hmm.
they put out an episode that was pertaining to whatever condition they were getting treated for.
Wow. Again, that is just awesome marketing, right? When you're not even
Yeah.
asking for it, people just spontaneously are like, hey, you got everyone in this group, check out this podcast.
Yeah, definitely.
They're
It's
going to,
and they listen to it, so it means a lot to us that they care enough to share it.
yeah, right. Well, that's certainly a sign that you're doing something right. Right, you know?
Right.
So what's your advice for marketing teams either at other eye care practices or any kind of medical practice potentially that are, that are thinking about podcasting and might want to give it a shot? What would be your advice for whether to, know if it's a good fit or not, or getting started?
I would say really it's talk to your doctors, it's you have to really want to do it and work with people that want to do it, because it's not easy at first, because it's such a concept that not a lot of people do, and if you're not really an expert on podcasting, it could be a little nerve-wracking. And then just ask people around you, who could help you, get started, what kind of equipment to buy, what platforms to use. We were really lucky that the doctor had a family friend who actually was almost like an expert in podcasting. So he was a
Hmm.
big help to us with recording and editing and, just kind of teaching us the ways of podcasting. So it's I would say do the research, be patient, and just go for it, because you never know until you start.
Hmm. Love that. That is expert advice. Well, Katya, thank you so much for your time. This was a great interview. It really was. I one of the best ones we've done in my
Thank
in
you.
my opinion. Thank you so much for your time. Really enjoyed speaking with you.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.